He had spent his entire life chained, beaten, and forgotten. A grizzly bear raised in fear, never knowing a world without pain. No one had ever dared touch him. No one had ever tried until a young woman walked into that enclosure and did something no one expected. She reached out, and he didn't growl, he didn't attack, he froze. And what happened next changed not only the bear, but the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. He didn't have a name, not one spoken with care, at least. The workers at the roadside facility in northern Montana referred to him as Number 4. He had no tags, no records, no past that anyone cared to remember. He was a grizzly over 700 pounds of raw muscle and fear, a beast raised in captivity, fed scraps through a rusted gate, and kept alive not out of love or conservation, but as a tourist sideshow. He had spent most of his 10 years in a rusting cage no longer than a pickup truck bed, concrete floor, steel bars, no trees, no sky, only the echo of passing cars and the sound of his own breathing in the silence of neglect. No one touched him, no one dared. He had learned to flinch at footsteps, to lurch at loud noises, to growl and pace and hide in the shadows of his pen, because the only hands he had ever known came with pain. One morning, in late October, the wind changed. He knew the scent before the people even arrived. Not fear, not anger, fresh air, trees, pine, hope. The door to his enclosure creaked open, and 2 men stepped in with thick gloves and tranquilizer guns. He lunged, as always, not to attack but to terrify. His roar echoed off the walls. His claws scraped the steel, but this time they didn't flinch. They just worked. Within minutes, a dart hit his flank. He tried to fight the pull of sleep, but it overtook him. For the first time in years, he collapsed into darkness, not brought by exhaustion, but something different. And when he opened his eyes again, he was somewhere else. The Wildlife Rescue and Rehabilitation Center sat nestled in a dense pine valley an hour outside Missoula. The enclosures were massive, natural, with streams and trees and space to move. But what stunned him most was not the size of the place, it was the silence, not the cold silence of abandonment. The warm kind, the kind that didn't come with shouts or cages, the kind filled with rustling leaves and distant bird song. And then he saw her, the woman. She didn't walk like the others. She knelt by the gate, calm, eyes low, hands still, no gloves, no tools, just presence. Her name was Ellie Hawthorne, a wildlife behavioral specialist who had worked with wolves and mountain lions, but never a grizzly until now. She didn't try to speak, didn't reach out. She just waited. Day after day, she sat. And the bear watched from the shadows of his new open-air pen. He watched her with the same haunted eyes that had seen only cruelty for a decade. And something inside him didn't growl. It paused. Day 10. Ellie arrived before sunrise, just as she had every day since the grizzly arrived. She wore the same brown canvas jacket, carried the same notebook in her back pocket, and sat cross-legged on the same flat stone about 15 feet from the edge of his new enclosure. She never brought food. She never made a sound. She just waited. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing, but to Boon, yes, she had finally given him a name. It was everything. Boon hadn't left the cover of the trees for more than a few seconds since he'd arrived. The natural space, though beautiful, overwhelmed him. For a bear who had never seen beyond steel bars, the freedom was almost terrifying. He still flinched at the wind and the branches, still paced nervously in the tall grass, still avoided the open. But each day his steps brought him closer to the woman who never forced anything, who never stared, only observed with a kind of patience most humans had forgotten how to hold. And that morning, something shifted. Ellie felt it first. She noticed how the usual hesitation in Boon's breathing wasn't there. His shoulders were low, his ears not pinned back. He took one step forward, then another. Ellie didn't look up, didn't move. She kept her eyes on a small leaf in her palm, pretending not to notice. The 700-pound bear approaching her, one slow, cautious step at a time. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from hope. Boon moved silently, each paw pressing into the damp earth without a sound. He was still half hidden by tall ferns, his body tense and low, but he didn't stop. 10 FT away. 8. 6. He could smell her now, not like the workers he had known. No scent of chemicals, no fear, no aggression. Just soil, soap, skin, and something else, something calm. Then Ellie did something he had never seen before. She opened her hand, a simple open palm facing upward, not reaching, not grabbing, not threatening, just offering, and Boon froze. The air was still. Time itself seemed to pause. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, he lowered his head, and for the first time in his life, he touched a human hand, just a brush of his snout, but it was real, and Ellie, feeling the warmth of his breath, let a tear fall silently down her cheek. That night, she wrote only one sentence in her journal. He let me in, but as the first wall fell, another would rise. The world outside wasn't ready to believe a grizzly could change. Ellie's footage was never meant to go public. She had filmed Boon's progress quietly. Small clips showing how he now stepped into the open, how he responded to her voice, how he no longer paced endlessly at the edge of the enclosure. It was for internal behavioral tracking, part of her research. But someone at the sanctuary shared one clip, and within 24 hours, the world knew about the tamed grizzly. The backlash was immediate. Hundreds of thousands of views, comments ranging from awe to outrage. This bear is unpredictable. He's still dangerous. Don't get too close. This is how people get mauled. Bears aren't pets. Ellie ignored most of it. She had worked with predators her entire career. She understood the risks, but she also understood something else. Trauma. Boon wasn't being tamed. He was healing, and people didn't like what they didn't understand. The board of directors at the sanctuary requested a meeting. They were nervous about liability, about headlines, about funding. "You're setting a precedent," one of them told her. "We've never had human-animal contact like this here. What if he turns?" Ellie stayed calm. "He's already turned," she said. "Not into a pet, not into a friend, but into something that can trust again. And if that isn't what rescue means, then what are we doing?" But she saw it in their eyes, doubt. She returned to Boon that afternoon, shaken. He was waiting by the trees, not pacing, waiting, as if he knew something in her had changed. She sat, but today she didn't smile. Her eyes were distant, her hands fidgeted. Boon approached more cautiously than usual. Then he did something she had never seen. He laid down in front of her, completely exposed, vulnerable, as if to say, "I trust you, even if they don't." Ellie bit her lip, tears burning her eyes. "They don't see what I see," she whispered. "But I won't leave you, I promise." She reached out. Boon leaned into her touch. And in that moment, despite the noise, despite the pressure, they were silent together, unshaken. But the decision would not be hers to make forever. One more incident, one more accusation, and Boon could be transferred to a zoo or worse, to isolation. Ellie knew it, and Boon somehow sensed it. When fear wins, the innocent always lose. But Boon was no longer alone. It started with an email. Subject: Urgent Inspection Board Review from Wildlife Regulation Committee to WRR Sanctuary Administration. They were sending an evaluator, someone to assess the human proximity risk that Boon posed. The committee didn't care about Ellie's journals or her years of field experience. They wanted protocols, liability waivers, control, and more than anything, they wanted distance. The evaluator's name was Dr. Baudet. Paul Granger, former military veterinarian, government contract behaviorist, clean, clinical, unshakably calm. Ellie met him at the sanctuary gate. He didn't shake her hand. "You've formed a dependent relationship," he said, walking briskly toward the bare enclosure. "That's dangerous for both of you." Ellie said nothing. She didn't need to defend Boon with words. She had footage, data, progress. But Granger didn't want to see Boon. He wanted to test him. They reached the enclosure. Boon was resting under his favorite pine. Massive paws crossed, ears relaxed. When he saw Ellie, he stood, not alarmed, just present. Granger stepped forward. Too fast, too direct. Boon stiffened. Ellie raised her hand. "Please, approach slowly. Let him." "I know what I'm doing," Granger interrupted. He reached the fence, stared into Boon's eyes, then, without warning, tossed a small stone toward the bear's feet. Boon flinched, then growled. A deep, low vibration that shook the air. Granger turned, satisfied. Unfit for human interaction, full behavioral regression under mild stress. He's to be listed for restricted enclosure reassignment. Ellie's heart broke. "You provoked him. I tested him, and he failed." "No," she said, stepping forward, her voice trembling. "You failed because you walked in here looking for danger instead of dignity." That night, Boon refused to approach the fence. He stayed in the shadows again. Ellie returned to her stone and waited, but he didn't come. Not on the first night. Not on the second. On the third, she left something behind. A glove, her scent, her trust. And on the fourth day, when she returned, the glove was gone, replaced by a fresh pine cone, perfectly placed, an offering. With time running out, Ellie must risk everything, even her career, to keep Boon where he belongs. But fate still had one more test waiting for both of them. The rain started as a whisper, a gentle drizzle at dusk, tapping the leaves, dampening the earth. Ellie barely noticed it as she sat by Boon's enclosure that evening, her hood up, journal open, hand resting near the fence line. Boon had crept closer again, not touching her this time, but watching, calm, silent. She smiled at him. He didn't flinch. For a moment, the world was still, but far upstream, deep in the mountains, the meltwater was building, and it was coming fast. At 2:14 a.m., the emergency alarms sounded through the sanctuary. Flash flood. The North Containment Dam had been overwhelmed. River levels were rising by the minute. Several enclosures were at risk of being breached, including Boon's. Ellie was already running barefoot across the gravel paths when the first trees gave way to the water. Staff evacuated the smaller animals first, the birds, the foxes, the rescued wolves. Ellie fought through waist-high current toward Boon's sector. Water was already pouring into the lower half of the enclosure. The backup gates were jammed. And Boon, he was cornered, clinging to a boulder near the back fence, water swirling beneath him. She called his name. "Boon. Boon, look at me." His eyes met hers. Wide. Unsure. Not wild. Not feral. Just afraid. She grabbed the manual release lever, jammed with mud, pulled. It didn't budge, pulled again. Her hands bled. Her chest heaved. The current surged. Boon slipped from the rock, and without thinking, Ellie dove into the enclosure. The water was ice. It tore at her arms, dragged at her legs. She reached him just as he clawed back up, his massive frame trembling with effort. He could have turned on her, could have swatted her away, but instead he let her grab his fur, and in the chaos she led him to the emergency gate, still stuck. Boon looked at it, then at her. Then, with a thunderous roar, he slammed his shoulder against the release bar. Once, twice, crack. The metal bent and the gate fell open. They collapsed into the upper corridor together, soaked, exhausted, breathing hard. Ellie rolled over in the mud, chest rising in sharp gasps. Boon stood above her, and then, slowly, he laid beside her, protective, present, and alive. The floodwaters receded by dawn, no lives lost. But everyone knew why. Because a grizzly bear, a creature no one believed could change, had not only saved himself, he had saved her. The world now had no choice but to see Boon for what he truly was. But what would they do with that truth? They filmed it, not intentionally, but one of the trail cameras mounted high in a pine caught the whole thing. The flood, the gate, the roar, the rescue. When the sanctuary's tech team reviewed the footage the next morning, they fell silent. One of them whispered, "He saved her." Within an hour, the clip was uploaded, first internally, then, after heavy debate, to the world, and the world watched. It started with a ripple. A few wildlife blogs picked it up, praising the sanctuary's bravery, then the major outlets. By the end of the week, Ellie and Boon were international headlines. Grizzly bear saves woman during Montana flood. The footage will leave you speechless. Millions watched the video over and over. Some cried, some doubted, but no one looked away. Ellie was thrust into the spotlight. Interviews, podcasts, panel discussions. What made you trust him? Did you think he'd hurt you? Was this training? Her answers stayed the same. He wasn't dangerous. He was hurting. There's a difference. And he didn't just trust me. I trusted him. She refused to let the narrative become a circus because Boon wasn't a miracle. He was. A survivor, and survivors deserve to be seen for who they are, not what we fear. The committee that once threatened to remove Boon now wanted to make him a symbol, a mascot for ethical rehabilitation. They offered to relocate him to a high-profile zoo with media visibility. Ellie said no. So did Boon, in his own way. When a transport crate was brought near his enclosure, he wouldn't go near it. He stood by the treeing, unmoving, eyes fixed on Ellie. She knelt by the fence. "They don't understand, do they?" she whispered. Boon blinked and then slowly turned his back on the crate and laid down. The sanctuary's board reversed the decision. Boon would stay, not in captivity, but in connection. A new section of the forest was officially designated Boon's territory. Semi-wild, secure, but open, monitored only for health, not control. A place where a bear could simply be a bear. Visitors came from all over, not to gawk, to learn. Children sat in circles as rangers told them the story of the bear who saved a woman during a flood, not with force, but with choice. And above the path leading into the woods, they placed a wooden sign, the Gentle Hand. Below it, a carved silhouette of Ellie sitting and a bear watching from the trees. But every story needs a final chapter, not for an end, but for a beginning. It had been 1 year since the flood. Autumn had returned, painting the sanctuary in gold and rust. The winds were soft, and the trees whispered with every breeze, as if passing on a story. Boon was no longer a mystery. He was a presence. Visitors still came, not just for the story, but for the silence that followed it. Parents stood quietly beside their children. Veterans found peace sitting alone beneath the pines. Some cried. Others just stood still listening. Because Boon's story wasn't about a miracle, it was about a second chance. Ellie had changed too. She no longer tried to explain him. She didn't need to. She simply visited him every day, sat beneath the same tree, and let the world happen around them. Boon came when he wanted, sometimes to lie near her, sometimes just to watch from a distance, and that was enough. The distance wasn't a barrier anymore, it was a choice. One morning, Ellie found something near her usual spot. Not placed, not human, just there, half buried in leaves, a smooth stone, flat, round. On its surface, a tiny crack that formed what looked like a heart. She picked it up, held it in her palm, and smiled. "You've always known," she whispered. Boon was nearby, as always, watching, but she didn't turn. She just laid the stone beside her and waited. In the weeks that followed, Boon visited less often, not out of fear, but because he didn't need her the same way anymore. He wandered deeper into his forest, claimed it, healed in it, became his own again. And Ellie, she let him because true love, real, wild, unscripted love, lets go when it's time. On the anniversary of Boon's arrival, the sanctuary held a gathering beneath the trees. Ellie spoke only briefly. He was never broken, just waiting for someone to stop fearing him long enough to see him. This forest is his now, but it remembers everything we learned here. Then she placed the smooth stone under the wooden sign, the Gentle Hand, and walked back into the quiet. No one saw Boon that day, but as the sun set, a single trail of paw prints appeared in the soft dirt behind the gathering circle, fresh. And beside the stone, another, a pine cone, perfectly placed. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who believes in second chances and help us spread messages of compassion, courage, and healing. Because even the wildest hearts can learn to trust again.